Hi guys, it's Miss Pope, and today we're going to be talking about the modernist period. And just so you know, the modernist period was between the years of 1900, about then, to 1965. So the start of the 20th century to 1965. Some of the key aspects of modernism are the fact that there was an unexpected break from the traditional ways of viewing the world. And this period, or this literary movement, was set in motion through a series of cultural shocks, the most important of which was World War I, which was from 1914 to 1918. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but with the dates of the different periods, but a lot of them have started to overlap in a very significant way. They could have even 50 years of the same time period where they're both technically happening. And then this was the beginning of the distinction between high art, or like high quality art, and low art, or like low quality art. And they started to have like that ranking system. And then during this period, it was the poets who took the fullest advantage of this new untraditional way of viewing the world. Women and minorities and the poor were still extremely marginalized in this period, to the point where they were basically silenced in society. They didn't really have a say about anything that was going on around them, and they weren't really seen in the arts or in the political realm, or even in any other aspect of society. They were kind of just put in their place and left there. Um, then there was also this shaken faith in the durability of the Western civilization. So people used to believe that the Western civilization, which is like us, Europe, any civilized society, they used to believe that we were going to survive forever. And during this period, they started to have like doubts about it, because we were in such a big period of war and we were fighting against each other. It was the Western world fighting against each other. So everyone thought that we were going to just end in destruction, basically. And this also raised doubts about the adequacy or the quality of traditional literacy. And it started to represent like the harsh realities that were in the post-war world. So you started to see a lot more realistic portrayals of daily life, and you started to see like not such a pretty white picket fence view of it. It was much more realistic to the time period, and it was much more realistic to what the people were going through, because this was a post-war world and all of the countries were in a severe amount of debt because of it. So modernism is characterized by what? This is our first quiz question. A focus on what is true and real. B, a break from traditional ways of viewing the world. C, social conditions and heredity drive human behavior. Or D, acquiring knowledge through self or contemplation of the inner self. It's not D. It's not C. And it's not A. So it is B, a break from traditional ways of viewing the world. So the main focus of modernism is there's a focus on the inner self and the inner consciousness. So you're contemplating who you are versus who everyone else around you is, or how you fit into society. It doesn't really care about nature that much, so that's really different from naturalism, which the main focus was nature and how we fit into the whole scheme of nature. Whereas this one, it's about it's going away from nature and history. And then instead of progress and growth, Modernists seem to think that the world is decaying and that there's this growing alienation of individual people. So instead of you being part of society, it's showing that you're slowly moving away from society, either as you age or as you make different decisions in your life. And a lot of the artists and intellectuals during this time period believe that the previous generation's way of doing things was just a dead end. They thought that like they were completely wrong and there was no way that they could expand on what they had been saying previously. And just so you guys know, that word alienation just means that you're separated from the rest of society or the rest of a group. So our featured poet for this period is actually William Butler Yeats. We're going to refer to him as Yeats from now on. He was born in 1865 and he died in 1939. So he lived a pretty long life for this time period. Yeats was an extreme perfectionist. He was constantly tightening up the language and getting rid of a lot of his more excessive imagery that he used. He was also known as one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. If you mention Yeats in a conversation to anyone who's in the literary world, they're gonna know who you're talking about just because he's that famous. His early writing drew from sources in Irish mythology and folklore, and he had a habit of constantly revising his earlier works and then republishing them as like a more perfected example or a more perfected version. So Yeats' poetry, some of the examples of it, he definitely stuck to traditional verse forms. So he was writing in iambic pentameter, and he was using traditional rhyme schemes. And so this was a little different than some of the other modernist writers who were breaking away from everything traditional and creating a whole new form of writing, but he was still very modernist in like what he wrote about. He did have those examples of alienation and the examples of the decaying world and all of that. He had those for sure. He originally wrote about the countryside or mythical heroes and like frustrated or unrequited love, but in 1916 or about that time period, his writing began to take on a new form, and he started using more ordinary speech rhythms and common vocabulary of like the everyday man. And he started to discuss everyday life more, and his poems became very realistic about things that people in everyday life would go through, things that you would see walking down the street, or things that you would experience as you grow older. So some of the characteristics of modernism that are prevalent in Yeats' work is demotic language. So what that is just the common language of everyday people. So just common verbiage, things that you would hear on the street. Political subject matter. He used to criticize or comment on the politics that were happening and just the political scene in general. And then he, unlike a lot of poets who try to pretty things up or present everything in a positive light, he did present the ugliness and the violence of society when it was appropriate. And like he wasn't making butterflies and rainbows ugly, but he was making the things that were happening in real life. So this post-war world, he was telling about the true ugliness of the people in it and the true ugliness of what had happened. And he broke away from his fictional subjects, and he stopped trying to attempt to make everything aesthetically pleasing, and just became very real. So this is another one of our quiz questions. So during Yeats' early writing, what were the sources that he drew from? Were they his childhood memories, fictional situations, Irish mythology and folklore, or his love for his wife? It's not his childhood memories. It's not fictional situations. and it's not his love for his wife. So it is actually Irish mythology and folklore. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is look at a poem by Yeats. And this poem is actually called When You Are Old. And the first thing that that tells me, looking at the title before I even read the poem at all, is just that I look at those words, when you are, and I think that he's talking about the future. This hasn't happened yet. This person's not old yet. But he's like saying, when you get old, or when you get to that point. Um, and the fact that it's saying you, it tells me that he's talking to another person. So that's just my first analysis of the title. Um, then some of the imagery that I see, I'm going to read you the poem first, actually. So when you are old and gray and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. So I think that this poem has a ton of imagery, and that's one of the reasons that I liked it so much when I was looking at it, because I think you can imagine someone who's old and gray, sitting and falling asleep by the fire, the shadows under their eyes, reading a book. All of these things you can totally imagine, and that's like this picture up here. That's what I imagine. I imagine an old guy sitting next to a fire, reading a book, possibly like falling asleep while he's reading this book. And it makes it really easy. The next thing that I want to look at is the attitude of this poem. So I don't see any harsh words or any like mean or nasty words or angry words. So I'm going to take this poem to have a friendly tone. I don't know if you agree with me, but it just seems like this person cares for the person that they're writing it about. And pleasant, maybe caring, you could add to that. That's going to be my analysis of the attitude or the tone. Obviously, we'll have to move into a few different stanzas to see if that's true about the whole poem or if it's maybe just this stanza, but that's just my analysis. For sound, I really want to focus on one specific word, and it's the repetition of this word and. And I noticed that it's repeated I thought it was 6 times. 1, 2, 3, yeah, 6 times. It's repeated 6 times in this 4-line stanza. And I think that it adds sort of a rhythm to the poem, and it makes you kind of slow down and give you that feeling of like growing old, because people typically associate growing old with kind of moving a little slower. So I'm going to read it to you again and just listen to how many ands there are. When you are old and gray and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. So again, like it just adds that like little bit of rhythm to the poem. The next thing, obviously, when we're focusing on sound, is the rhyme scheme. So this one is A, B, B, A. And just so you guys know, this is an iambic pentameter, and it's actually really easy to see. It's when you are old and gray and full of sleep. And it's unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, right? So that's really easy. The next thing that we're going to look at is the speaker. And I would honestly, I don't think that we have to get super specific with this, especially with this short of a section that we're looking at. But I would just say that the speaker is a male friend. Because again, it seems like they're talking about someone that they care about. So that's why I assume that they're a friend or maybe a relative or something like that. But it seems like they're speaking to someone that they really do care about. For some reason, I do think that it's a male. There's no line specifically, so if you think that it sounds more like a female, feel free to write female down. And then for signs of the time, there is the general topic of growing old and the subject of the poem who seems to be sitting alone in their house and they're away from the rest of society. They don't have anybody with them. I think that just totally plays into this idea of the alienated self and modernism. So I'm going to put old, um, nodding by the fire again. Those words just make me seem, it makes it seem like the poem is like the subject of the poem or the person that the poem is about is just very lonely. Um, and then they might even be like reminiscing about the past. I'm not exactly sure. But the last thing that I want to talk to you guys about is the theme. And I think that there's just like this overarching theme of um, being able to focus on like the good in life, or being able to focus on like the time that we have maybe. Um, but I'm just going to put like focusing on the good in life even until the end. So it's like telling you to remember all these things that you had that were good, even though now you're old. Okay, so that's going to conclude this presentation today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot and took really good notes. If you missed any of those questions throughout the quiz or throughout the presentation, feel free to go back and re-look at them. They came directly from some of the slides, so yeah, go ahead and take another look. We'll be focusing on this poem or poems like this tomorrow, so you will need to know some of those aspects of modernism. So yeah, have a good day, guys. I will see you in class. Bye.